Here are my 5 favorite ways to strengthen hip external rotation within a yoga practice. So hip external rotation is this direction of movement where we rotate from our hip joint and our toes turn to point out to the side. So what I was showing right here in kind of anatomy geeky terms, this might be called open chain hip external rotation. And there's also closed chain hip external rotation where the foot stays fixed and the body rotates relative to the hip joint. So that would be something like this. So you can see this for this right leg, I just externally rotated this right hip, just like I was doing here when it was open chain, but here it's closed chain. And if you see, if I do this and then kind of take a step back, what does this look like? It starts to look like triangle pose in yoga. Or if I took a deeper step back and bent my knee, then it starts to look like warrior two in yoga. So hip external rotation is really relevant for us as yogis, and it can be a great idea to do some targeted hip external rotation strengthening. My first favorite way to strengthen hip external rotation is with something called a hip airplane. Now, in a yoga context, we would recognize the hip airplane as something like warrior three opening up to half moon and then going back to warrior three. And kind of in like the greater maybe fitness and rehab worlds, they call it a hip airplane, and they tend to do it with the support, with like balance support. So your hand like on a wall or on something. So you basically start with your hips facing down, which is to us as yogis warrior three, and then we roll open into half moon. And what this is this is externally rotating the standing hip. And then when we rotate back, we are internally rotating, but the external rotators are eccentrically working to control the lower. And when we rotate up into like what we call half moon, the external rotators are concentrically working to, as they shorten, to make that external rotation happen. So this is a hip airplane where we rotate back and forth. And again, we could do this without the aid of balance, but it just makes stability more challenging. And when there's more stability challenge, that's great, but it can sometimes take away from our ability to effectively target strength, because strength and stability are not the same qualities. So anyway, that's the hip airplane. My second favorite way to strengthen the hip external rotators is by taking a resistance band, looping it around your foot, and then it's nice to take a wide step here, pull the band toward your opposite hip and kind of anchor it there, and then take that foot and turn it out against the resistance of the band and then turn it back in. So rotate your foot out, rotate back in. The band is trying to pull it into internal rotation, but we're having to resist by rotating. We resist that band as we rotate into external rotation. So repeating this over and over can be a great way to work on these external hip rotators. My third favorite way to target hip external rotation strength in yoga is with something called a pigeon hinge. Now, normally in pigeon pose, we tend to treat this pose pretty passively. We just kind of hang out here and we might fold forward, and all of that is excellent. I love pigeon pose, but it's passive, so that's not really strengthening. If we're interested in strengthening the hip external rotators though, we can place our leg in external rotation as it is in pigeon pose. And then instead of coming into like this pigeon where we have the hips all the way down on the floor, instead of that, we keep the pelvis up. So it's actually floating up off the floor. And that means that we're having to use the muscles all around the hips to help hold us up. So that's going to make it already active. So actually just holding this isometric lifted pigeon will be strengthening for the external rotators. But if we add this hinge, we hinge forward and we lift back up, this will even add on. It makes it more dynamic and it adds more load. And it strengthens the hip external rotation muscles even more. So we can do that right there on the floor. You could also bring in like a chair or a bench, something elevated, and place your pigeon leg up higher, and then do your pigeon hinges with an elevated pigeon leg. And that's the pigeon hinge. My fourth favorite way to strengthen the hip external rotators right within a yoga practice is with something called a clamshell raise. Now there's a single clamshell raise, and this you may be familiar with, this is pretty common, where we lie on our side and then we lift the top knee, and this is moving that hip through external rotation. The double clamshell raise, which I kind of like a little more, there's just more going on, is where we actually lift both hips. And this is targeting the external rotators on both hips as we lift up here. So this is the clamshell raise. It's a great way to bring in like dynamic hip external rotation strengthening. And we can do it right on the yoga mat, maybe like instead of side plank every now and then. My final favorite way to target the hip external rotators right within a yoga context is with something called quadruped hip arcs. So you might be familiar with something like this, where quadruped is hands and knees. So hands and knees, and then we step a leg out to the side, and then we lift a leg straight up. So straight leg straight up. And that's really great for targeting the outer hips. But if we specifically want to target the external rotators, then we want to add some rotation in there, because this is abduction, but it's not rotation. So here's how we can add rotation into something similar to these like side leg lifts. So what we do here is we actually lift our heel up off the floor, and that puts us into hip internal rotation. And then from there, we arc. These are quadruped hip arcs, right? So we arc up, heel up, and then heel aims down. And then we land with the toes up and the heel down. And then we reverse that, lift the toes, point the toes down, and then touch the ball of the foot down. So arcing up and down, we get that a similar lateral hip targeting, but with this addition of actual hip rotation up, up and down. So that's the quadruped hip arc. If you explore any of these ideas for strengthening hip external rotation, I hope you enjoy them. And if you appreciated this content, subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date on all of the content and tips that I share.